Hello, everybody, and welcome to our world today, the Unionist perspective. This is part 10 of our ongoing conversation in the series. And we'd like to kick off with just a continuation of our exploration of the financial challenges faced by SVB Bank, which in the end resulted in quite a challenge related to banking in the US. And just to maybe just put it in perspective again, SVB was a bank that funded tech startups. And so probably one of the niche banks in that space that did that kind of funding. And with the bank basically crashing, one of the things that we read in the story was their choice to, at some point, invest in government bonds. And at the time of the discussion, we hadn't really explored what the investment class of a government bond really is. And so in doing some research, the essence of a government bond is that you buy a government bond as a potential investment. But in buying that bond, you are actually lending money to the government. That loan to the government then basically attracts a level of interest for a fixed period of time. So you have a level of interest which is quite low, or sometimes could actually be zero. You also have a fixed period of time during which you receive regular repayments in terms of interest paid to you. That interest paid to you does not contribute to the capital investment. So it's just a regular repayment in terms of interest, but it doesn't actually grow the capital that you've invested. So the capital remains the same, whether it's over a 1-year period and it can go up to a 30-year period. Your capital doesn't grow. You receive a regular payments in the form of interest over a fixed period of time. Once that fixed period of time lapses, you are repaid your initial capital without any growth. So you can see how, from an investment point of view, it might not make the most sense, because in essence, what you do with an investment is you're looking for capital growth. You're looking for compounded growth on interest. So generally, from an investment point of view, you don't get paid money out at regular intervals. That money literally goes back into your overall investment and it grows your capital portion. And so it compounds the interest that you're earning. So you're basically earning bigger and bigger margins of interest over longer periods of time. But obviously you don't touch the capital, and you do not touch the interest. And that's how your investment is guaranteed to grow, and at maturity date, you're guaranteed to have a bigger return in terms of investments. So that's kind of the almost dichotomy of what a normal investment would do versus what a government bond would do. Now, the purpose of government bonds is that governments use it to raise funds when they're going to invest in big infrastructure projects, such as building roads, such as building hospitals, anything like that that has almost a national impact would be something that would be covered under the capital raised through bonds. And also, since you're literally lending money to the government, so the government doesn't necessarily have the means to grow that bond component. They might invest in an offshore, and the commodities might grow and all those kind of things. But from a government bond point of view, that doesn't bring in significant capital growth, and it doesn't bring in significant interest. And I think in the case of SVB Bank, it might be perfect to have an almost guaranteed payment at intervals with your capital remaining secure, but it doesn't guarantee significant growth in that capital investment. I think that's just where they may have potentially not made the smartest investment decision. But again, you know, it also requires us to understand what their financial policy was, where they were what they were planning from a long-term growth point of view, that kind of thing. Because as I said, with other investments, you tie them up for longer in periods of time, which allows the capital to grow and the interest to be compounded. So it's likely that if you disinvest earlier, you lose the little growth that you may have had over that shorter period of time, because investments require longer term periods in order for you to realize the value of that investment. So I hope that kind of puts it in perspective for everybody. I'm very happy for everybody to share anything that they might know from a government bonds point of view that would say, okay, maybe financial decisions in SVB Bank were not as grounded as what they needed to be.
I wanted to ask a question because I know that this was part of it. This was part of why SVB failed as a bank, and it's that, so when they bought the bonds, interest rates were really low, like from the central bank, meaning, you know, if the central bank of the US, I guess, is giving money to private banks in the US, I don't know, the interest rate would be like really low, like there would be very little expectation of excessive repayment, so money was easy, basically, was the idea. And so then the interest rates became like much higher recently because the government was saying don't want money to become so easily available. We want it to be less available so we can get inflation down. So my question is, I guess, to clarify this, like, why is it that bonds lose value if like the interest rates go up? You know, like what effect does that play? What effect does that cause? I had it, but then
yeah, okay, so my thought process here from what I've read would be that if interest rates get higher, that means that you're borrowing, when you borrow money, it's more expensive to borrow it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that interest rate hike. So for instance, if you were, let's say you had car repayments of what, $500 a month, but does that sound like a...
Yeah.
It's a simple example, but I'm trying to just put it in perspective. So in essence, you would have car repayments of $500 a month. So inflation goes up, which means that the cost of repayment for the vehicle is more expensive. So in that, as it increases, you might then have to pay in that month $510. Where does that $10 come from? You have to sacrifice it from your other spending. Or if you have bond repayments or housing loan repayments, it becomes expensive. It becomes more expensive to repay the debt because of the higher interest rate. So debt becomes more expensive when inflation goes up. That is why that's why government bonds have such a low interest rate. Because if the inflation goes up, it would mean that they would have to repay their borrowers at a higher rate.
Oh, I thought that with bonds there it was like a fixed interest rate, like from when you buy it, like when you
Yes,
give
so
them, it's like
yes,
a
but remember, if it's fixed, that means it's flat. So even, and then that's probably why they keep it flat. But that
because
means that your money that you would have gotten bigger interest on in other spaces, you're still getting the same low
okay.
interest, which
Mhm.
is generally then counterintuitive to where you have debt to repay. And you're repaying it at a higher rate, but you're receiving interest. You're receiving smaller and smaller interest repayments.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And then
So it doesn't balance out, basically.
yeah, I totally get it. And so if you like gave money to the government, and then so you're going to get what you gave plus this amount of interest, and that's fixed, that's not going to change. So if interest rates get higher, basically, then somebody would have to put in like less money to get the same amount of total return in that amount of time, basically. That's what
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that's why, yeah, okay.
and in essence, it's really that trade-off of if I put my money into this investment class, what level of interest do I earn as opposed to a capped interest rate in something else?
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, and that was something that I was like confused by too, like why they chose to put like so much. I think it said they put like 80 to 100 million or more, like, or a lot of money in government bonds, and I was confused why they did that, because they were at like an all-time like interest low. But then when the pandemic was ending and the mini recession was ending, the interest rates went way up again. And so that means that they were like setting themselves up to lose a lot of money. So I'm like, why did they do that? You know?
I'm
What's
surprised too, like sorry. I'm surprised too. I felt like from my understanding from all the banks in France, it's like you invest in fixed interest at like 5%, for example, and you get 10% into other investments that have more returns in the short term, especially when you invest in specific sectors, like what they were doing, like high techs, you know. And it's like one of those instances where it's surprising that they would put their eggs in just one basket, because that's not how it's done usually. But like we won't exactly know the how of the decisions that they did internally in here. So yeah, I don't know. It's just like a question that may remain unanswered, but I think like it's surprising for everyone. I'm glad that we have that clarity. And at the same time, yeah, I'm surprised that they would put so much into a fixed investment. That's because that's not how it's done in society right now. So yeah, it's just my thought.
So I'm not really surprised, because if you have a fixed interest rate, it would probably be on asset classes that are less, that almost have less of a risk attached to them. So you get a fixed interest rate for lower risk investments, where you would probably get a higher fluctuating interest rate for higher risk investments, because in that way you also get a higher return. So that those investment decisions are generally based on doing higher return, higher risk investments, as opposed to lower return, lower risk investments. people generally funnel money into the higher risk stuff because the potential for greater returns is so much bigger. So it's kind of like from our understanding in financial terms, it's like the higher it's this kind of thing, with this part being kind of what we would call jaws. So the higher the risk appetite, the wider the jaws open, which means that you actually have a higher potential for a higher return.
Yeah, true. But also, like, we knew that it wasn't you know, the financial trend anymore to put investments into these bonds. Like, it feels like everybody knew this. So it's like, yeah, I just feel like maybe we don't have to understand the why, but just know that it was definitely a mistake to not readjust at that time the decisions on the financial investments of everybody in that bank.
No, it might just mean that they were a little bit risk averse. So they wanted to guarantee their capital at the end of the period. And so it makes sense to then have invested it in bonds because you are guaranteed the return of your capital, which would make sense if you are in a very startup phase and you don't really want to lose anything.
And I think too that it was partly because this big investment happened in 2020 when the pandemic just started. That's when they put all this into bonds. And I think it was because, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like during the pandemic, it was actually a great time for business for a lot of social media and tech companies because a lot was going online, like even more business was going online. So it was great for social media and tech companies, but they probably were like 50% stoked and 50% spooked because like the pandemic caused this like mini recession and they were like, wow, so this is a great opportunity for us, but like we don't know what's going to happen. So we're just going to choose the safest investment that we can find. Okay. So like we're excited and we're like, oh, this is gonna be great, but we also want to be careful, and it feels like it was that basically calculus of like fear, basically, like they were just like too worried, about what was gonna happen. And I think that's why it didn't pan out for them. But it's what it seems like.
Yeah, I liked your summary of that. Because I didn't understand why put all your eggs in one basket unless it was like kind of like a scarcity mentality of I have to do this because you didn't believe in like the ultimate abundance of putting in high risk, high rewards. So yeah, there was that scarcity and it led to their fall, it seems.
Yeah, that's very good analysis. It's kind of counterintuitive in that sector when you would think that because it's growing so much, you would want to have investments that are risky as well. That's just the game. But yeah, we can like choose for them, definitely. So it's kind of funny how one decision can have so much of a big impact like that. And it's funny, and I want to make a transition here because it feels like as we were talking about it, it was a sensitive topic for them, even though they were in a sector that is risky, so they would have to know the risks that are there. And so a lot of our topics this week are revolving around sensitivity. And that's why people make such drastic choices in this situation. And yeah, I'm just thinking about like or they have such like brutal discussions around these situations. So yeah, I'm thinking about definitely the TikTok hearing. I think that's probably all over the news, all over the world right now. Of a show in Washington, DC. And it revolves around something that is very important for Americans. And I really liked Representative Jackson's videos around it, because it wasn't like everybody else. It wasn't like most of Congress saying like, TikTok is always bad and they're doing this with our data and things like that, as even though we know that social media, they're not doing anything that other social media platforms are doing at the moment, even if they are in a risky society for data, which is China. But it was not like the whole of the internet trolling the Congress because some of the questions were really bad, and kind of defending TikTok as well, because it's less black and white than that. It's really about protecting our data overall, but it's not on the sole responsibility of Shou to protect that. And he is taking initiative to go into the protection of that data by transferring probably TikTok to the US. But he is asking, maybe he's showing, are you doing the right things to protect people's data? And is that by convicting him that we can protect TikTok's data by banning TikTok, which would probably be bad for many businesses? Or should we actually take measures to protect data overall from the Chinese government, but as well in the internal American system where the data is still not protected? So yeah, there is a lot of debate around that. And I think like we should probably uncover the brutal discussion and hearing and see what's at the core, and yeah, not take so much of a black and white stance on it. But yeah, I'm really curious, what are your thoughts on it? Maybe personal thoughts on the TikTok hearing, and yeah, do you have anything to add to what I just said?
So I do have a feeling that it's not necessarily related to data protection, because what purpose does TikTok serve? TikTok serves the purpose of connecting people in such a way that their ability to share information is so much more readily available, so much faster. So is this about protecting data or having the power to control narratives?
I don't know. It feels like the government's intention is not clear, and that was what Representative Jackson was saying. Is this about data, or is this about convicting TikTok because they're Chinese? Or is this about protecting our citizens? Like, we're not sure. And that uncertainty really showed up in some of the questions, I would say half of the questions of the hearing, that didn't feel relevant at all to what was discussed at that moment. So yeah, there are probably several things at play. I would say adversity to China probably fuels this a little bit. And yeah, maybe some people want to control the narrative. I don't know if it's like the whole of the intention of Congress, but it's good that you're mentioning that, because it makes us question what actually is Congress doing, like what are the intentions, and why haven't they taken actions before internally to prevent this, instead of just like blaming someone?
Yeah, their intentions aren't clear, but their actions have been clear on why haven't they been taking action before. As like Jeff Jackson was saying, Congress could have banned privacy rights and data to be outsourced like this, and could have restrained it, had some restrictions, but they didn't. Instead, they're deflecting on TikTok CEO, Facebook CEO. Of course, they do have their own actions that they need to take for their own companies, but it's also like you as the head should have taken actions to prevent this and be more clear on your intentions of why you want to bring conviction into TikTok's CEO. Because ultimately it has been a major source of information spread and has benefited so many people, more than, I would say, privacy data being leaked or something or another. If anything, it's beneficial for the whole world to know what the other side of the world, what's going on at all times. And we see that when you start banning TikTok in other countries during, the earthquakes and wars, there's always a problem. There's always something that's trying to be suppressed. So in one side, it's very clear that their actions are maneuvering in such a way that isn't showing true justice to the people, because their questions didn't show that. Although I'm not sure what questions they asked, I just took from Jeff Jackson, so.
Something else that kind of pops up into my mind is all these social media platforms run on algorithms that bring up things into your feed, that potentially profile you by what you have on your feed, what you choose to click on, those kind of things. So those algorithms also, to me, have almost a control element to them, in that things are directed towards you based on a certain formula, because at the end of the day, an algorithm to me is just basically a formula. And so you're profiled based on your likes, based on your views, based on whatever, in terms of this algorithm. And it kind of concerning, because one of the things that we discussed at some point during the Black Lives Matter conversation was how profiling is done along racial lines that would then almost highlight you as primary suspicious in certain instances and that kind of thing. So just how much of the intentions, not only of government, but also of these algorithm writers, are as pure as what we would prefer them to be or like them to be.
I would say it's difficult. It's like, that's why it's a sensitive topic. It's kind of like AI or all of this ethical discussions. Profiling is usually used for companies in marketing to offer personalized services to people. So in a sense, it's not bad. It's the use of it afterwards that can be bad. And so profiling, in a sense, or social media, in a sense, isn't bad. It's just the concern that is being highlighted is the use of all that is here that is bad. And so it was kind of highlighted too in the hearing, in the sense that profiling by the algorithm wasn't the focal point all the time, but it was almost like the filters were the focal point, in the sense that, are they registering your facial features or not? Because some of them use the shape of the head to have answers above them, and some of them, like what the CEO was saying, the CEO was saying was that for the filters with like sunglasses, they have to know where the eyes are. An algorithm that wanted to only provide entertainment would do that, like take the shape of the head. I think the concerns of Congress is, do they also register how the face looks? And there would be a concern. So the CEO was saying that they did not take the face of people to store them as data. And yeah, that's just how this question revolves. Like, they're really like good questions to ask overall, but like it's just about protecting people and knowing what is used, what use is made of this data. At this time, we don't know. But I do think like the protective measures, the appropriate protective measures are not in banning TikTok, which would be the easy solution for extreme representatives and senators to solve the problem. And I say solve the problem with like, I use it carefully, but it would not be, because this choice would have ramifications that are not good for the economy. So you have to be at work there and as a leader and say, right, this is not an easy solution. It requires work. Are we ready to work in order to have the best solution for our economy, but also for the protection of data?
What you mentioned kind of makes me feel like what Granville was saying. There's like some truth in that, in terms of it's not necessarily about the data protection, but more so like a form of social control, like controlling the narrative. Because if like they are concerned about people's faces, like why just focus on TikTok? Because on FaceTime, that is a thing as well. I mean, all the filters that you use on Instagram, they use your face. I mean, Zoom could potentially, like, who knows, who's watching like the Zoom streams and like, where that data is going. So I feel like it's very odd that the focus is just on TikTok, but not on the technology in general, because it's used on many different platforms. And the fact that it's just focused on this one company that happens to be a Chinese company, and I don't know, I just feel like there's so many ulterior motives, and which is like not surprising within the realm of American politics or just politics in general. I just feel like there's a lot of deflecting usually, and most of the time you're not really seeing what the true motivation is behind the action that's taking place. There's like a lot of posturing, like they say that they care about data protection and people, but do you really? Because if you did, I feel like the conversation would be a little different.
Right, and you're touching the core point that we go on over and over again, and that also reflects in gun policies and why there are still massive shootings happening even this week in Nashville. When they say they care about people and lives, when they just want to control women's body, for example, or transgender laws, like we can go into this core pattern in every part of society. which is ironic because Apple, their data is based in China. So they have the same problem to say, like, if Chinese government wants this data, you can't refuse it. And also, these companies don't have to tell you that they did, for example. And for now, it seems like China doesn't do that because it's just interested in like the money influx that this brings inside their country because they need it at the moment. But it's kind of the same. Apple is doing the same. Other companies that are social and big tech are doing the same. So yeah, that's just, it's wider than TikTok. And so yeah, I feel like posturing is probably a good way to put the problem, to put perspective to a problem, which is why they're not taking the right action.
Right. If they wanted to do something, they really could have, instead of deflecting into these big companies, because Samsung has cameras on their TV. They're probably getting an image of us. I mean, our MacBooks, if they put a cap in the beginning or even now, they could sue the companies that are going against these right violations. But instead of taking the easy and straight divine path, they're just going around in circles. So
The
Yeah,
other thing that's quite interesting is if they're starting to have data protection conversations, and then you consider the two big card issuers in the world, which is MasterCard and Visa. They are literally the predominant card producers and issuers across the world. All banks will have one or other of their technology. And those financial transaction details and information don't sit in those countries. They sit in massive data warehouses in places like Indonesia.
wow.
So, if you're gonna start, and the reason why I know that is because I actually looked after a credit card business for one of the big commercial banks in South Africa. And so they share this kind of information when you start to look at what's new card technology and whether your card technology starts to become wearable so that you can actually purchase things with a wristband, for instance, and that kind of stuff. So they're constantly in the space of innovation. But in order to test those things and to ensure that the data is secure, it's often stored outside of the country. So if we're really having a concern around data protection and integrity and security, it would make sense to look at it across the board, because having information about your financial transactions probably gives somebody access to your life in a much more granular way than facial recognition or profile or things like that. So I just think we need to be cognizant that the surface conversation might be valid to almost, again, posture, to support a political agenda. But if we wanted to know the truth of it, I mean, if you had control of financial information, financial transactional information, that gives you greater power than some of the social media platforms, to be perfectly honest. And that's in my opinion anyway.
yeah, it does seem opportunistic, kind of like maybe they want to set a precedent for being able to do more of what they want. I mean, the US Congress, like the ability to do more of what they want to social media companies, and they can just target TikTok because US-China relations are at a significant low right now, so they can just do that, But it could partly be that. And then also Deanna Jackson commented while we were talking and was talking about algorithms and how she said they have a control aspect to them. And she says on her IG, she barely sees posts from the people she chooses to follow. And she only sees what's marketed to her based on her profile, but also she's understanding the benefits of an algorithm.
Yeah.
I just thought that was interesting to mention.
Yeah, definitely. Meta and Instagram have been struggling to find the right balance between like this profiling and showing up what's marketed to people, but also not suppressing all of the entertainment and also close relative value of looking at your close friends and family photos. So yeah, it's a work in progress. I think for Congress and in general, there's a component of like being paralyzed or being in fear of working forever. And I think that's why they want the easy short-term route. And we have this problem globally in humanity. Like, for example, oh, I don't want to cook, so I'm going to eat out today. And you have a short-term satisfaction and you feel it's easy, but you lose a little bit of your finances, or you leak your finances by eating out. And also you're more exposed to disease when you get older, like diabetes or things like that, if you don't look after your health and don't know what you're eating. And so there's a component, as a leader, there's always a component of chop wood, carry water, like we say in the teachings of Union. And so when you start to look at data or health, like you start doing one thing for data, but then you would start to look at MasterCard, and you have to always go into great lengths to unify the system, the financial system, with the protection of citizens and things like that. And I think that may be paralyzing to some people to just want to look at the sheer size of the work, and that's why they'd rather convict someone or blame someone than take the long route. But we know with the teachings of Union that the long route is actually the shorter route to divinity and heaven, and it's worth it. It's worth going to its great lengths, and sometimes it seems like her work doesn't end. But for someone who's truly doing their life purpose, that doesn't matter, because they have to do it. It's in their, like, it's about respecting themselves too. And so Congress and all the people that have a life purpose in politics really have to awaken to this feeling of, am I doing the divine thing? And the divine thing may seem daunting and difficult at this time, but it's going to get me closer and my brothers and sisters closer to heaven faster. And that's not what they're doing right now. And that's the core of all of their choices and politics at the moment. Yeah. And that's just a reflection that is an easy transition as well to France and the protests on pension, because obviously the pension reform is not perfect. It's not, definitely, and that's why so many people are outraged at it. But it's been in the works for 20 years, and all presidents have said, we need to change it. It's been there since 1946. For some of it, there is something that needs to change. It's not adapted anymore. And everyone would backtrack because the opposition and people would say, like, we don't want to change, but there's a need for change. And I'm not saying that maybe Macron has all the rights to force this reform. But there was always something that was very clear with his presidency. It was like he would not backtrack from acting. And it would seem like a deep upheaval. Now that I think about it, I'm realizing this as I speak. It would seem like a deep upheaval at the moment of change. But I think he's basically his objectives, and he might not be communicating it well because he has a communication block with his government. I'm practically sure of it. Is that it would simplify the pension reform that has been so complex and not unified for so long, but it doesn't mean that after we have a basis of the reform, like we can change, we can explore. It's like what we're doing in this community, for example. We have a basis, it's a hard base, and then we see like, oh, this doesn't apply to this branch, for example. So we are going to adapt it to this branch and this sector and this work. But the foundation is unified. And I think the core intention, contrary to Congress, was good. It was to unify the pension reform. It's just that the application and the discussion and the communication around it are probably not good because the pension reform has been amended and changed so much by parliament. And also it's just like some people are using it as tools to just oppose the government and just say, revolution, like we don't want this government anymore. So there's a lot around it. And it's not to say that I don't stand with the people that are manifesting, but there's a truth that there's a need for change. And I would agree that I would be worried too if I felt like I didn't have the security and stability that I had before in my pension for retirement. But it's also looking on the fear side, and maybe the fear side is appealing a lot right now. Not that it's a bad thing that they're demonstrating. So yeah, I want to have your non-French look and point of view on it. I'm curious to know how it feels to you from the outside.
So you're saying the implementation of the reform is what got most of the people angry of it because of the non-communication?
The reform in general doesn't please people, but like.
But do you think it's a benefit for the country to have this type of reform, or do you think things need to change within the reform?
I think everybody agrees that we need some type of reform.
Yeah.
But
this particular reform, I
yeah,
thought most people were upset because of the retirement age being pushed back, as well as the complete force of it being implemented instead of it going through more discussion. But now you're saying that there's more to the story.
Yeah, there's more. Because if you would just go to basically the left side of the political spectrum is saying that it's outrageous since the beginning, and so they're blocking it in parliament over and over again. And they've amended it from its original form so much that it doesn't please anyone anymore. It pleased everyone even less than it pleased them before. And I think we mustn't forget this component, and everyone from like left and also extreme right has been wanting for the government to be out of office for so long. But it feels like there's also the political agenda of saying like, right, we're gonna block you all the time so that you have to force the reform to happen. And so I feel like there's also this component of like Macron is depicted as someone like Jupiter, because everyone feels like he's condescending and not taking action for the good of people. That may be true, like maybe he has a superiority complex, but I also feel like there's something in reality that makes it feel like the political agendas of other people is so loud that it permeates all of society. And we're not really looking at the core, which is like, there's a need for change. And he's just wanting to change it. But yeah, it's complex. I don't have a right answer for you because I'm not like, the reform is not perfect. It's so complicated.
I just wanted to get your perspective.
Yeah, thanks. But
But just a question: what is the essence of the reform? Is it literally just the change of age, or is there something else related to the benefit from their pension fund? Because something can't bother so many people for such a long time, and in its simplicity,
yeah.
there cannot be this level of complexity. So I really don't understand what the actual issue is.
So that's what I was saying. There's work culture in France that says like now we're at retirement at 62. The reform would push that retirement at 64. Most of the people that are manifesting are okay with it going from 62 to 64, with exceptions. The thing is, there are special retirement reforms for employment that is supposed to be hard physically. And what people are scared about is that these special employments would lose their early retirement pension and would be forced to go to retirement at 64 like everybody else, even though the work is really daunting on their body. From my understanding, the core base of the pension reform would say it's unifying, but it does not have to include some of these workers with special treatment. And it was supposed to be based on research on how their work has evolved and if their special retirement pension is adapted or not. The problem is, first of all, if you go to retirement at 52 or 55, obviously like 10 years more is gonna be like, in your head, it's gonna be, oh my God, like I can't. Really, I can't. It's paralyzing fear again. And second of all, there are so many amended terms in that reform that it's causing even more fear that special workers would lose all of their social advantages. And there's even more to that in the story. But basically, the development of it all made it so that people are feeling abandoned in their social advantages overall, all of society. And so what began as little bits of exceptions is now something that is blowing up because everyone feels like the text is not adapted to them anymore, and that includes almost all of society. It's a really, I'm trying to explain this in simple terms, but like there's so much to it. And I think there's so much misunderstandings around that text because a lot of people don't know actually what it's about and are letting their fear or political agenda speak on it.
That's what I was gonna say.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Carry on, yeah.
I feel like there's like this energy of like being apathetic to like the truth. And I feel like coming from like the French population, like the people, and like I don't know if it's accurate or not, but you know, I thought about it once Nadia posted that that video of, you know, the fire in the square and everyone just like kind of sitting around and like they see it, but they're all just like fine with it. And I know it was just like it's probably not a whole representation of like the issue in France, but I feel like there is like some sort of lack of concern or lack of motivation to like really look at the core issue, and it's just, it keeps deflecting. And that's why like something so simple I feel like has turned into a very complex issue when it doesn't necessarily need to be that way.
Exactly. I feel people feel like it's become an extreme fight between people that are in protest and the government, and the police fight is like extremely violent. There are some shocking things that are happening at the moment. But I was in Paris and I did go out behind a blockade of trash bags to go to dinner, but it's because we didn't have anything to eat at the apartment. But so it's a little bit more complicated than that. But it's like life goes on, but there is, at the same time, there's just like things. I wouldn't have stayed in the street with like flames. I don't feel safe. But there's definitely apathy, to really looking at what the text is instead of just listening to the loud noises of everybody else. Like nobody is focusing on what's actually going on in that reform. We're just focusing on, is the government going to suffer and go out, like Macron be fired or something, or step out, or if he's going to stay. And it's just like reduced to that, and that's just that irks me.
Didn't the same thing happen when Sarkozy was president? Like I feel like the same.
2005 for something else, but it was kind of more justified like this. But yeah, kind of, yeah.
So like, you know what, like I have a general concern around a pension reform that scares people. And we can say that they choose, you know, you choose your emotion, you choose your state of mind, you choose how you respond. But there's also the core truth of, if this changes so significantly, what happens to my quality of life later in life?
Like the same.
So it's kind of that there's this kind of quality of life decision around, as you said, they might have certain special benefits that they get sooner. You have to understand how their work has changed over the years, and whether it's as taxing as it was when the initial pension legislation was written, or whether it's relaxed, and whether they are just being lackadaisy in the fact that they want the same scale of benefits, but they're not working at the same rate of physical exertion. Because, you know, it's just kind of like a little bit underhanded that people are not truly understanding the shift and fighting for benefits that they might not actually be entitled to because the nature of their work has changed. Now it's turned into a political fight because, well, you know, my guy is fighting for me. I don't know what my guy is fighting for, but my guy is fighting for me against the other guy. So I'm against the other guy, and he's the dictator and he's the problem. And so I think it's a lot of deflection, but just from our sense of our conversation as it started off, it's fueled by confusion. It's not fueled by the desire to understand.
It's fueled by miscommunication. And I would say, as a last word, it's fueled as well by the spiritual lie that retirement is needed. And so the French have a really big problem with changing. There's a core block to changing. That's about it. And retirement in spiritual truth is not needed. But if you were saying that, like, it would be so easy sweep, we don't have to discuss this anymore. But it's obviously, you have to communicate and be compassionate with it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so everybody, thank you. We've reached our hour. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you to everybody that's been following us and chatting to us in the conversation. Thank you to all of you that have liked and subscribed to our Church of Union YouTube channel. Also, please feel free to do so if you haven't already. And we look forward to seeing all of you again next week. Thank you, everybody. Good night.